Hello. Okay, so let's get started. I am way excited to get started on this pattern. It's been one that I've been thinking about for a year. Ever since we did the Dreaming of Spring, I have been wanting to do a fall girl to go with her. So let's do it. All right. Today we're just going to keep it really, really simple, and we're just going to start with a back stitch and a whipped back stitch. Both are great to learn. So if you are brand new to embroidery, this is a great first stitch to learn. Okay, so I'm going to start with the black. It might be the only time we use our black is on this outline. So it's DMC 310, it's just black. So if you're new to embroidery and you don't know, always pull from the number end. If you pull from this end with the DMC thread, you're more likely to have like knots as you're pulling your thread out. So pull from this end and then get enough thread. I usually say from your fingertip to your elbow. If you are more experienced, you can use as much thread as you want. I use a little bit more than that, but when you're first starting out, it's a little bit easier if you have a little bit of a shorter thread. The longer it is, the more likely you are to get knots and stuff. So, all right, embroidery thread has 6 strands. Let me see if I can separate it. Okay, so we've got like 6 strands in here. So we're gonna separate these often while we're stitching. Today we're gonna use 2 strands. So to get out 2 strands, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can get 2 separated by themselves over here and then pull them apart. This is twisted together. So if you hold on to them at the top and separate them and then just untwist them as you pull them apart, you shouldn't have like any knots. Every once in a while, kind of stop and let it untwist and then go ahead and finish pulling those apart. You can also pull them out one at a time. So if you have all of your strands like this and you just grab one single strand, you can just like pull that out of the group. It'll kind of bunch up though if you're not careful, so kind of watch what you're doing, but then you'll just have one single strand and then you can pull out as many as you need. So 1, 2, 3, however many you're stitching with. I'm gonna stitch with 2 today. You could stitch with 1 if you want it thinner. You could stitch with 3 or 4 or 5. Just depends on how thick you want it. So I'm gonna do 2 because I want it fairly thin. Okay, so I am the embroiderer that knots her thread. Some people don't. So if you don't, that's fine. I just tie a little knot and then I kind of move it down to the end and there we go. Usually I double knot it. If I'm using 2 strands or less, I'll double knot it. Just to make sure it doesn't pull through my fabric. Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you're watching this live, you can comment. Don't use the question box thing. I don't use that. Just leave a comment and I can see those and I can answer your questions while I'm stitching. If you're watching this on the replay and you have a question, you can still comment below the video and I'll respond to you. Or you can message me privately and I will answer your questions there as well. So whatever is easiest. Okay, so I'm going to start here and work my way down and then we'll do the other side. I'm gonna try and get this zoomed in a bit. Let's see how much it'll let me. There we go. Let me move this a little closer to me. Okay, so we are gonna do a back stitch and then I'll show you how to whip it if you want to do that. So 2 stitches in 1 today. So we're just gonna come up from the back and make a small stitch. The bigger the stitch, the straighter your line is going to be. So since we're doing a curved line, we want these stitches to be fairly, a little bit smaller than if you were doing just a straight line, because then you're more likely to be able to see that curve without having it look like jagged, I guess is a good word. So this is my thumbnail. So it's pretty small. I know it's zoomed in, so it doesn't look as small as it is, but. So first stitch goes from one end, forward a stitch, and then we're gonna back stitch. So we go forward a stitch length. We wanna keep these as similar in size as we can. And we're gonna go up a stitch length away, and then we're gonna go down in this same hole that we created when we went down with our first hole. And then we're just gonna keep doing that pattern. So we're gonna go forward a stitch length, so it's the same. And then we'll back stitch into that same hole that we've already created. If you're going down into a different hole, then you'll have gaps in your stitches. So make sure you're using that same hole that you're coming up in. And we're just gonna go like that all the way to the end. So like 2 more stitches. All right, and that is a back stitch. Simple, nice. Now, I'm gonna whip it because when I'm doing lines, I don't like that I can see these stitch breaks. You can kind of see those stitches. So to create a smoother line, we're gonna do a whipped back stitch. So we came up here, we went down here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna come back up at the end of our stitch. Okay. So now the rest of this stitching is gonna be done on top of the fabric. We're not gonna put our needle back down under our fabric until we get to the end. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna push our needle through. So we're going under that stitch that we just created and pull it through. And then we're gonna go back to the same side. You can go down or up, it doesn't matter, but just pick one way and stick with it. So I went up, so I'm gonna go up again on this next stitch. So we're gonna go under each of these stitches in the same direction. Whatever way you choose, just go the same direction every time. So I'm always going up, but if it's easier for you to go down, if you're left-handed, it might be easier to go down, but whatever way you choose, just keep going in the same direction. And see how it just like smooths that line out? It's like nice and smooth. Now, if you were doing this like with 2 colors, you'd be able to see that like twirling around your stitches, but because it's black, it just like smooths it out. Now, I've gone under all of my stitches, so I'm back to the top. Now, this is where I started. So when I go down, there's gonna be a knot right here because that's where I started. So just kind of be careful. I usually grab my finger and kind of pull that knot out of the way, like with my finger, so that I don't grab that. If you grab that knot, you might struggle with like grabbing onto that and like pulling your threads funny, but that's it. That's a whipped back stitch. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do just the lips just so you can see me stitch a little bit more. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the whipped back stitch from, depending on what pattern you're doing. If you're doing the hand, then you'll do a whipped back stitch on the entire hand and then all the way down the face, around to this side, just until you get to the greenery, and then the other side of the neck and the lips. Okay, so if you have the hand, you're gonna have a lot more whipped back stitch than the rest of us. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm gonna tie this off really quick. I'll show you how I do that, and then I will move to the lips and I'll stitch those live, and then I'll do the rest off screen. so you can do that as homework. Okay, so when I'm finishing a thread, right now we have our knot and then our whipped back stitch. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna come under this first stitch that I made. I'm just gonna go under it one more time and then do a little bit of a knot. Sometimes I'll try to like pull that tail in there so I don't have like that piece sticking out. In the past, I have like not worried about like my tail. I don't care where my stitches go, but I've been trying to make a cleaner back. So especially where there's nothing that's going to be stitched around here, one thing I like to do instead of just cutting my thread, because it's knotted, so it's fine, but I've been kind of like wrapping it around a few stitches, like doing a whipped stitch on the back a little bit, and then cutting my tail really, really short. So then I don't have like a trailing thread like in the front. You can't see, like if I had a tail, then it could be like hanging out over here. So this is one thing I've been doing to kind of help that not be an issue. So a little bit cleaner on the back. Okay. So I'm just gonna do another knot and then I'll stitch my lips. Do you guys have any questions while you're watching? One thing I love about stitch alongs is seeing other people's color palettes that they chose, because with all the options, it's fun to see, like I could see somebody doing like brown instead of black, which I thought about doing, but I didn't do. All right, so I'm gonna do the lips. So I've already done my knot. I'm just gonna start at the end and stitch around. This is a very curved line. So I'm gonna do these stitches even smaller than I did on the neck, because I want to make sure that it's nice and smooth and rounded. Now, if you don't want to do a whipped back stitch, you could just leave this as a back stitch and call it a day. There's nothing wrong with that. It still looks great. It's just a preference of mine to do a whipped back stitch for lines like this, or like lettering and stuff like that. I think back stitch has its place, and sometimes I'll do a back stitch, but I personally like it whipped. Oops, that's a little bit big. My hard thing is I struggle to get all my stitches the same length. That's my other problem with a back stitch, is because I'll do a whipped back stitch, because then my stitches don't look like they're different sizes. I usually start out smaller and I get bigger as I get to the as I get to the end. It's fine. So if you're like me, then a whipped back stitch will be your best friend. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do that bottom lip, and then I'm gonna go back and whip it, and then I'll do the top and whip it, and then I'll do the center and whip it, because it kind of, there's like that break in the stitching. Like if I kept going, then I'd have a problem with doing the whipped part. I don't know. So I'm gonna go this way. If this was not in a hoop stand, I wouldn't need two hands. Hoop stands have their place, but a whipped back stitch is not my favorite time to have my work in a hoop stand. Just can't quite get the right angle. It's like an awkward. But if I was holding it, I would be too wobbly. You wouldn't be able to see what I was doing. Okay. There we go. Now I do have a knot there, so I'm kind of pushing it out of the way. And then we'll do the top. Let me show you also. Sometimes I'll do a modified back stitch. So right now I did a back stitch. So I started here and I came down here. Sometimes I'll come up here and go forward a stitch. So it's like saving just the littlest bit of thread. The only time that this becomes an issue is if you do a forward stitch to the end and then you're in the same place that you, like if you go down here and then you need to do a whipped back, like, okay, I'll show you at the end. But anyways, sometimes I do that if I'm close to running out of thread and I'm almost done, because it'll just save just the tiniest bit of thread. It's not like a huge saving, but if you don't want to get out a piece of thread for just a few stitches, it can be helpful. Just make sure you're coming up in that same hole, which can sometimes be a little bit of a struggle. I don't do this as often as I used to, just because I think it looks a little bit nicer to do a back stitch. It keeps the stitches a little bit more uniformed. Just make sure when you come to the end, because right now, since I did a back stitch, if I came up here and went down here, then I couldn't also come up here to do my whipped back stitch. So just make sure that your last stitch is a back stitch so that you can come back up at the end and whip it. This one's easier than the bottom was. Okay, there's the top. One more line, and then I will let you go. So I will finish mine off camera and then I'll post a photo to my stories. If you're watching this on the replay, it will be saved to a highlight. And if you don't see it on Monday, September 6th. But it will be there saved. Stitch. Actually, I might just leave that. I keep that center line just a tiny bit thinner. Yep, I'm gonna leave that. Okay. I like it. All right, so that is it for today. Get your back stitching done, and then we will start stitching. I think we might do the cornucopia tomorrow. I have the stitches I want to do written down. I just haven't decided what order. So anyways, get your back stitching done, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Have a good day. Bye.